So what happens when we die? It's a question that humanity has wrestled with throughout history. But a new study conducted by NYU may have found some answers. Dr. Sam Parnia is the director of critical care and resuscitation research at NYU Langone School of Medicine, where he ran this study. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Parnia.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
What would you say? What actually happens when you're clinically dead?
You know, when people die, essentially it's when the heart stops. So this has been going on for, as far as we know, millennia, not longer. And when the heart stops, you stop breathing and your brain shuts down, and that's how we declare people dead. And that's why we give a time of death and we give them a note. And really, to be honest with you, until about 50 years ago, that was the point of death. So people become lifeless, motionless, the brain shuts down. But now through advances in medicine, we can actually bring people back to life even after they've gone beyond that threshold of death, and study what happens to them. And one of the interesting things, of course, is that the brain completely shuts down, as I said. But what's fascinating is that the cells inside the body, and particularly the cells inside the brain, do not suddenly become annihilated. They go through a process of decay that can take a few hours, which is why we can actually medically bring people back to life after they have technically gone beyond that threshold of death for tens of minutes, if not hours of time afterwards. And that, of course, raises many interesting questions about what happens when we die.
So tell me more about this study. How did you conduct it? And tell me about, how you came about reaching your findings, your conclusion.
I'm an intensive care doctor, so my job is to essentially save people's lives and prevent them from dying. But unfortunately, people do die, and we try to revive them. What we have found is that over the last few decades, many millions of people have now come back, and many of them have reported, actually, anecdotally, that they've been able to see and hear things going on, even though from our perspective, they should have been dead and their brain should not be functioning at all. And so we became intrigued to study this, one, because it was fascinating, and two, because we tried to revive people without brain damage and to ensure they don't have any disorders of consciousness, so not becoming like brain damaged or having a vegetative state. At any rate, so this particular study is the largest study ever carried out in the world. It was done in 15 medical centers across the US and in Europe. And we studied more than 2,000 people who'd gone through this cardiac arrest or process of death. And we did not expect people to have any consciousness or awareness, but intriguingly, up to 40% of people came back and had a perception of being aware of what was happening to them, even though they had technically gone beyond the threshold of death.
Why do you think that is?
Well, there's a lot to it. I should also add that among that group, 10% had a very deep, profound mystical experience that was very true to them. But interestingly, 2% actually had full awareness, could describe all the events that were going on that were validated. So of course the question is, why does that happen? And we don't have the answers, because to our scientific model, when people have died, there should be no more conscious awareness going on. But it sounds like maybe consciousness is able to continue. And by that, I don't mean that they're awake, but that entity that makes us who we are, makes Sam who he is, makes Rena who she is, the self, the mind, seems to continue and doesn't become annihilated after a person has gone through their process of death.
The hallucination-inducing drug ayahuasca has been used for centuries by tribes in South America during spiritual ceremonies. But as it becomes more mainstream, what exactly is it and how does it affect your body and brain? Ayahuasca is actually a combination of the leaves of one plant and the vines of another, neither of which have any hallucinogenic power on their own. But the leaves do contain DMT, which is structurally similar to your neurotransmitter serotonin and to the chemical found in magic mushrooms. The problem is, your gut enzymes normally deactivate DMT before it's absorbed into your bloodstream, and this is where the vines come in. They inhibit your gut enzymes from working properly and allow DMT to travel within your blood and eventually cross the blood-brain barrier. The effects of the drink usually hit around half an hour after consumption, with hallucinations peaking after 1 hour and subsiding within 4 to 6 hours. But these hallucinations are reported to be different from drugs like LSD and shrooms in that most people are fully aware that they're visually hallucinating. In addition, instead of hearing voices, the sounds heard are usually exasperations of the noises already occurring around them. And unlike those who consume LSD or shrooms for a good trip, many who drink ayahuasca are seeking to reconcile with their thoughts and emotions, as well as past and present traumatic events. Afterwards, most feel more at ease with their thoughts and more accepting of their present situation. The default mode network is a distinct area of the brain that, if overactive, is associated with depression, anxiety, and social phobia, and fMRI brain scans show that ayahuasca causes a significant decrease in activity within the default mode network. This is usually linked with a meditative state and explains why some ayahuasca drinkers feel at peace with themselves and find a renewed sense of purpose after a trip. Additionally, DMT has been linked with proteins that promote the maintenance of long-term memory, neuroplasticity, and the regeneration of new neurons. It can bind to specific receptors found in mitochondria and endoplasmic reticula, and may even have the potential to kill certain cancerous cells. On top of this, alkaloids from the vine have been shown to induce apoptosis in mice melanoma cells and certain liver cancer cells in humans. This is not to say that ayahuasca is a replacement for radiation or chemotherapy, but it may hold future possibilities for cancer research.
It was fantastic. These were people, spirits, souls, I'm not quite sure what to call them. All the words sound a little goofy. But they embraced me and were so filled with love and joy. And they were people that I had known for an eternity. And they had known me for an eternity. And we were so happy to see each other. And they were clearly there to help me go down this path and protect me. And it was wonderful. They were exploding with God's love and grace, and they took me down this path that was so beautiful that I have really no words to describe it. And time and space had a different sense, and so I could rejoice with them. Simultaneously, I could look back at the riverbank and see my body being pulled to the shore and seeing CPR being started. And I looked back on my body and sort of felt fondly toward it and thought, gee, you served me well. And it was then that I truly realized that I must actually be dead.
Wow. Do you, as a doctor, have a medical explanation for any of that?
Where medicine ends, God begins. That's the real answer. Because this was not a dream or a hallucination, and it wasn't the result of a dying brain. This was more real than anything we experience here on Earth.
And now, having been through it, do you have any fear of your own death?
Oh, absolutely not. I wouldn't hasten it, but I am looking forward to going back when it's the right time.
Wow.
Our society is absolutely designed to shut down 90% of the potential of the human creature. Why should it be the case that society is afraid of realizing human potential? And what it comes down to is special interests. That there are those who run things in society, and that there are those who are there to kind of serve them and serve their ends and serve their needs. And so what our society has created is a realm of unquestioning meat robots who will perform their daily tasks without complaining and without causing any trouble. And that may be very useful to certain small interest groups, but it's extremely damaging to the rest of humanity. Once we realize our potential, we don't need elites anymore. Who needs elites? Who needs to be led? This is another revelation that comes from working with psychedelics, is we do not need leaders. They are not over us, telling us what to do. They may imagine that that's what they're doing, but they have no right to do that. And the moment we begin to wake up and start asking really profound questions about the nature of reality and about the society we live in, their power is instantly diminished. And I think that's why we've seen such vigor and real nasty unpleasantness put into this horrible, wicked thing called the war on drugs, which has been used as an excuse to enter the inner sanctum of people's lives. See, if I'm not sovereign over my own consciousness, if I can't make free choices about my own consciousness, if I can't make those free choices while doing no harm to others, then I am not free in any useful or meaningful sense. And the moment that I free myself, then I become a danger to those who run things in the world. Anybody who has been led to question the nature of things profoundly as a result of psychedelics is a danger to the status quo.
So the mind has this ability to do this on its own. What do you think that is that something worth considering, that this is some sort of a pathway to a nearby dimension, or to something that's around us all the time but we just don't have access to with normal neurochemistry?
You know, there's
too many what ifs, or who knows?
No, I mean, there's there's so much in what you said where you have to go back and unpack all of these things. When we got excited about DMT, Terrence and me, in the late 60s, what led us to go to La Chirera was that it seemed like a completely different order of magnitude than any of the other psychedelics. And we came to it really from a childhood that was steeped in science fiction. So we carried with us the idea, this really is another dimension. And it may be a portal to another dimension. And as science fiction nuts, we were totally okay with that.
Yeah.
And we thought maybe DMT was, and maybe it is. Or it somehow pulls the curtain back on something that's around us all the time that we don't see. But again, in thinking about these things, is it something that is entirely within the brain that it originates, or is it something that, is it like a lens that, or our eyes are covered with filters and DMT temporarily removes those filters? I think it's hard to know. I mean, I think maybe experimentally we could begin to approach this.
But like, I'm interested as well with this. I keep bringing up the subject of DMT. Like, what? I guess what I want to know about is, like, because I'm, obviously a person in recovery. I don't drink, I don't take drugs, haven't done for a long time, and I recognise for certain people that they can't do it safely. Psychedelics and hallucinogens, it seem to me, exist in a realm outside of that, because they're not pleasure seeking. Right. They're like, seem to me like it's a spiritual portal. However, I'm a crafty bastard when it comes to this stuff, and I'm always looking for an in. Yeah, because I am doing that. I'm looking for a loophole. It's like I'm going around like a sort of a trash lawyer looking for some way that I could get into. Is there? Hold on a second. What about this clause?
Trash lawyer. That's a great way of putting it. Yeah, I mean, I know people that have problems with addiction that have done psychedelics and didn't have a problem. But I'm sure some people have had problems, and I don't know about them. DMT is interesting in that, and it's not necessary, it's not an intoxicant in the way that you would think about traditionally. You are still you in the face of this experience. And I think it's some sort of a chemical gateway. That's what I think. I think there's a gateway in your mind that can lead to some other dimension that's probably there all the time.
If there is a omnipresent, continually existing realm that human beings aren't accessing because of the particular biochemical formulation of consciousness as it is in this point in our evolution, and that we can get there, and it seems as, like, I've heard Terence McKenna say, it's more real. It's more real. There's stuff in there.
Yes.
And excuse me, and when he talks about them beings, like that he describes as self-dribbling basketballs, creating like Fabergé egg, like, devices through vibration, and they're telling you to do it.
I never saw that.
I want that.
He's called them machine elves. He's called them all sorts of different things. The way I've described them is they're the geometric patterns made out of love and understanding. That's what they seem like.
So you can look at a geometrical pattern and read meaning into it. It had an emotional quality.
They're made out of something, and they move, they change. Like, they don't stay what they are. They're constantly evolving in front of you into something more and more beautiful. It's very weird.
What did it make you feel?
Like I knew nothing. That was the most profound aspect. Like, all of this stuff that you concentrate on every day is nonsense. And there is some other thing that's connected, that's probably influencing this world.
Yeah.
And it's probably what people see when they have near-death experiences, the depictions of the afterlife. I mean, it's probably what it all is.
And religious experiences,
Yeah.
and when prophets are talking about, oh my God, I went into this realm,
Sure.
there's these beings, they've told me we're all one, we have to love each other.
Scholars in Jerusalem are connecting Moses' experience with the burning bush to the acacia tree which is rich in DMT. The burning bush is what God was to Moses. And that through this burning bush, he came out with these 10 commandments of how people should live their lives. I mean, that easily could have been just a very convoluted sort of translation of a DMT trip.
Certainly. And also, when you think of, certainly there are archetypal images that seem to be repeated throughout ancient cultures and archaic stories that seem to refer to the potential for plant experiences to affect consciousness. Even the Garden of Eden, do not eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, that otherwise you will become as gods. You know, like, I sense that.
And I go into the issue of ayahuasca in this book because, first of all, ayahuasca is itself another example of Amazonian science. As you and I and many of the listeners and viewers know, the active ingredient of ayahuasca is DMT, dimethyltryptamine. But dimethyltryptamine is not normally accessible through the gut. We have to smoke it or vape it to get that rocket ship to the other side of reality. And the journey lasts, what, 10, 12 minutes, not much more than that, and sometimes quite a lot less. What ayahuasca does is it makes DMT available through the gut. The reason it's not available through the gut is because of an enzyme in the gut called monoamine oxidase. And that switches off DMT on contact. The ayahuasca vine, which is one of the 2 ingredients of the ayahuasca brew, the other ingredient is leaves that contain DMT. The ayahuasca vine contains a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which switches off the enzyme in the gut and allows the DMT to be accessed orally, which produces a rather different journey from the smoked or vaped DMT trip. It's a much longer journey. It's 4 or 5 hours. It allows you to integrate and to interrelate with the strange landscapes in which you find yourself amongst. And the entities that you encounter, I'm not making any claims about the reality status of those entities, but what I am saying, and it's a fact, is that people who work with DMT and ayahuasca do encounter what they construe to be entities who communicate with them intelligently. So somebody in the Amazon, out of 150,000 different species of plants and trees, selected 2 that are not psychoactive on their own, but when put together, create an extraordinary visionary brew. And what it's connected to in South American religious and spiritual thinking is what happens to us when we die. The Tucano, who are an Amazonian people who work regularly with ayahuasca, I mean, the Tucano actually will give a teaspoonful of ayahuasca to a newborn infant. They feel ayahuasca is so important that there is a hidden realm around us which we are not normally aware of, and we need to be aware of it, and ayahuasca is an important part of that. In their ayahuasca journeys, the Tucano shamans experience visions, and they will then come back to an alert, normal, problem-solving state of consciousness, and they will paint and depict their visions. And what's intriguing, and I go into it in the book, is that quite a number of the Tucano paintings of the other world, of the afterlife realm, of the entrance to the other world, are geometrical, and they look exactly like the geoglyphs. So I'm beginning to wonder whether these geoglyphs were part of a system of spiritual ideas concerning what happens to us after death and what we need to do in this life to ensure a beneficial outcome. And oddly enough, that same system of ideas is found in the Mississippi Valley. In the Amazon, it involves particularly ayahuasca and the belief that the ayahuasca journey takes you to the afterlife realm and a journey along the Milky Way. In the Mississippi Valley, the mound builder sites up and down the Mississippi Valley, particularly Moundville in Alabama, exactly the same system of religious ideas associated with geometrical constructions. That on death, the soul, they're very specific, ascends to the constellation of Orion, transits from the constellation of Orion to the Milky Way, makes a journey along the Milky Way, which they call the path of souls, and encounters challenges and ordeals where the soul must account for the life that it has lived. Then we go to Egypt, and what do we find? The same system of ideas. The soul must rise up to the constellation of Orion. There's a narrow shaft cut through the southern side of the Great Pyramid of Giza, which targets directly the lowest of the 3 stars of Orion's belt. widely accepted as a star shaft or a soul shaft. The soul would rise up through that shaft, get to the constellation of Orion, which stands by the banks of the Milky Way. It would then transit to the Milky Way, which the ancient Egyptians called the winding waterway. And it would make a journey along the Milky Way where it would be confronted by challenges and ordeals. Very similar idea to the Tucano, very similar idea to the Mississippi Valley. As far as we know, none of these cultures were in contact with one another. Either we're dealing with a huge, unbelievable, extraordinarily detailed coincidence involving architecture and ideas, or we're looking at a legacy that was inherited in all of these different places.
Do you have some sort of conclusion as to how far the mind and consciousness goes?
Again, from what we can determine, which is actually fascinating, and it raises questions about our whole science, about what happens when we die, is that it appears that even though people have gone beyond that threshold of death and their brain has shut down, that entity that we call consciousness, the mind, the psyche, whatever you want to call it, does not seem to become annihilated. From the evidence we have, that at least tens of minutes, if not hours of time afterwards, how long beyond that, we don't know at this point.
For the folks who have lost consciousness and come back, have there been any long-term effects afterwards?
Well, those people who have these very deep, profound, mystical experiences, often they describe a sensation of being very peaceful, seeing a bright, warm, welcoming light, sometimes deceased relatives. And intriguingly, some of them describe a sensation of a being that they describe as being perfect and full of light and love and compassion. Those who have that experience are often very positively transformed for the rest of their lives. It's very profound, it's real to them. They become less afraid of death, they lose their fear of death completely. They engage in altruism, they're more helpful to people, they engage more with family. It completely changes them. So there's something very profound about this experience that they have.